Hello and welcome to Rewildology, the podcast that explores conservation, travel, and rewilding the planet. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell-Norman, conservation biologist and adventure traveler. What was the last film that moved you? A movie that was so well produced that it shook you to your very core. Think deeply about the film for a moment. What elements did the producer add that took the experience to a new level? Even if you can't pinpoint the producer's secret sauce, how excited would you be if he or she had a personal revolution and decided to use their skills to tell a conservation story through video? Without hesitation, you'd be one of the first in line to watch it and share with everyone you know. This thought experiment leads us to ask, what makes an impactful conservation film that isn't full of propaganda or completely misses the point? Well, everyone, I'm excited to inform you that I had the opportunity to ask these questions and so much more with today's guest. In this episode, I'm chatting with Tom Opre, award-winning filmmaker and producer. Growing up in Michigan, Tom spent his childhood exploring the outdoors. His father, a well-known outdoor writer and former filmmaker himself, inspired Tom to pursue film in college. After he graduated, his father connected him with a film friend in Florida, and Tom's career was launched. He went on to form his own production company and produced many commercial films, mostly in outdoor sports and recreation. At a fateful event in 2016, a Zambian man approached Tom and asked him to record an incredible story unfolding in his country. A chieftainess, whose people were dying from starvation, approached the man, Roland Norton, asking him to please bring opportunity to their community. For the next 3 years, Tom recorded the community's recovery, including all the triumphs, struggles, and conspiracies. He named the film Killing the Shepherd, which just completed the film festival circuit and was released online a couple weeks ago. Tom and I dive deep into the full story without any spoilers, I promise. If you're not a supporter of hunting, I still highly recommend that you listen to the full episode to hear how the Soli people saw hunting tourism as a solution to their plight. Tom also parallels their story with hunting conservation in the United States. It was a thought-provoking conversation, and I hope you will take a few moments to ponder on it too. Killing the Shepherd is currently available to watch at shepherdsofwildlife.org until January 15th, 2022, and will be viewable through streaming platforms afterward. I'll be sure to update you all on which platforms once they're locked in. If you're loving the podcast, please hit that subscribe button to never miss a future episode, and be sure to follow Rewildology on all the social platforms. All right, everyone, here is my conversation with Tom. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So let's pause. Okay. So let's go back for a second. And you've already started to dive into your story, which I absolutely love. But let's get back into more of a chronological order here. Obviously, you did not become an award-winning filmmaker overnight. So let's explore your journey here. Take me back in time. Where did you grow up, and why did you decide to go into film?
Well, Brooke, first of all, I want to say thank you very much for letting me to be here on the Rewildology podcast. So, and I have to say, we met each other over Clubhouse. And
yes, we
so
did.
Having discussions with a bunch of like-minded folks about wildlife and habitat conservation. And you came out of the blue somehow, and then we just connected. And that's kind of the cool things about Clubhouse and some of these other platforms. So thank you for having me on today. It's a great honor and a privilege. I've been carrying a camera since I was 19, but go back even farther when I was a kid. My dad was an outdoor writer. He wrote about, all the outdoor sports, and from camping and fishing to hunting and recreating and RVing and all that stuff for Outdoor Life and Field and Stream magazines for like 30 years. And at the same time, he was also the outdoor editor of the Detroit Free Press. So I grew up in Michigan, outside of Ann Arbor, University of Michigan, big house. I understand you're from Ohio. But I won't hold it against you since I've been. Yeah, well, I won't say what I would say. Anyways, I went to Grand Valley, so I'm not a part of it. My brother's a Spartan though, so my younger brother.
Okay.
So yeah, no, I just, my dad was making some outdoor films in the late 60s and early 70s when I was, I mean, I wasn't obviously carrying a camera then. And when I got to be about 10, 12 years old, I would sneak in his office and there was these reels of film laying around in this projector, 16 millimeter projectors. And you, I don't know if you remember those things. I used to play those when I was in school, because we didn't really have video, was just kind of coming around when I got to school. And so I would stick the film in the projector and line up everything and then play these things. And it was, video is film of these planes, float planes landing in Ontario, Canada. They were catching these big fish and walleye. And it just was really cool. And I said, man, that's really cool. Cause you grow up, you kind of, if you have a good relationship with your father, which I did, you kind of want to emulate your parents to some extent. You see what they've done. And my dad was hanging out with really cool people, and it was fun. Athletes, the Detroit Tigers, Jack Morris was always calling up my dad, said, hey, we got to go fishing someday. We got to go, Kirk Gibson, we got to go hunting, I grew up around Ted Nugent, he was a family friend. So yeah, but that was just my life. That's my parents' life, that's what they did. But I watched what happened with the filmmaking stuff my dad did. My dad didn't really do it seriously after when he did it early in his career. He was a bona fide full-time writer. And when I went to college, I had a football scholarship. I told you I played at Grand Valley, and they had a brand new PBS station they had just built on the banks of the Grand River in downtown Grand Rapids. It's beautiful studio, brand new camera gear, brand new edit suites, and all this equipment and engineering, just incredible stuff. And so I just immersed myself in that and started playing around with it. And I said, yeah, I kind of like this. This is fun. And ended up working full time right before the last year or so I was at school. Working full time, I was doing a lot of 40 hours a week, doing production. At the same time, I was finishing up, I don't know, a whole zillion hours of work. But I had a bunch of internships, and so it was pretty cool to be a part of that. But it was a time of my life where you don't have any responsibilities, you don't have a home payment, you don't have a car payment per se or anything major. And my dad had a great friend that was a filmmaker that had done some incredible documentary films. Some of them, one of them had actually won a Golden Lion at Cannes, and some of his TV commercials. And he did fishing commercials and outdoor type stuff. And so moving down to Florida right out of college, the auto industry was, kind of going on one of its down deals, and there wasn't a whole lot of jobs, even though my dad knew everybody in Detroit. And so I went down to Florida and just, I had $900 in my pocket, and I had a little S15 GMC pickup truck with a cap on it. And I had all my life possessions in the back, and I just started figuring out what to do. And this friend of my dad had me come in, and I sat down and I went out to the Waffle House and had breakfast. That's where I met him. And if your northern folks probably won't know what a Waffle House is, but it's an iconic breakfast joint 24/7 in the South. But the first thing they put out there was this funky looking yellow stuff that looked like porridge. I said, what the heck is this? And he started laughing. He says, grits, which is corn. It's almost like mealie meal in Africa. Yes. So I was like, yeah, what the heck is this stuff? But, from there he hired me, and I was making $50 a day, and I lived out at his house for the first 3 months. And then a feature film came into town, and I went and did an interview, and I ended up working on a movie with, the Karate Kid, whatever his name is, and Martin Sheen was also a star in the film. So I just became a sponge, and for the next several years, I worked on some feature films, Iron Eagle movies, Horton Foot movies, and worked in Texas and Arizona. And I got to meet a lot of people in the film business that really knew what they were doing. Some iconic folks in production and directing, and I was working behind the scenes in production management. And I just was a sponge, tried to learn everything I could. And from there, some friends of mine I'd met back in Florida said, "Hey, we got a Discovery Channel show we want to do." And these guys were just underwater cinematographers and videographers, and they didn't really know how to run production management. And they said, "Hey, you want to come back here and produce this thing?" And I'm like, okay, fine. So it ended up, I think it was like early 90s, 93, 94, but it was the Great Shark Hunt. And it was the premiere show for Shark Week then on Discovery Channel. I think it was 23, maybe 24. So,
wow.
It was some pretty cool stuff. And then from then on, I ended up working, the documentary world was okay, but it was not as good as the commercial film world, which is the TV commercial world. And in Florida, where I lived, we had companies coming from all over the world to do production, usually in the colder months of the year in the North Country. So they come down in the fall through the winter and the spring to shoot Budweiser commercials for Canada. We did a lot of stuff for European clients, but, I was constantly busy. And then a company called Sea-Doo Watercraft called me when I was 24. Actually, was a photographer from Dana Point, California, a guy named Art Brewer. At the time, he had just finished being the photo editor for Surfer magazine, and Art's he's become one of these icon. I mean, he's like an Annie Leibovitz of surf photography. He's the godfather of it. But anyways, he called me up and said, "Hey, we need to hire somebody to help us do this job." And the Sea-Doo people said, "You're really good at what you do. Can you help us?" And he's, "Yeah, sure. What do you got going on?" So we ended up doing about $250,000 production together. And they said, "We just don't want to lose any money." And I said, "That's great. How much money do you want to make?" And they said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, this is the budget, but I can tell you, I do all the deals here. So, I can certainly help you guys make sure you make a profit margin on it." And so they said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, just got to split it with me."
I get a cut too.
Yeah, I got a cut too. So yeah, it worked out really cool because not only did they do very well, but I also did well. And it was kind of the start of a lot of really great things. Sea-Doo was an incredible company. At that time was under the Bombardier name out of Quebec. And these folks, they owned companies that were making airplanes. They had, ATVs and snowmobiles and watercraft and just all kinds of really cool stuff. And so they ended up hiring me on all kinds of stuff for the next, I don't know, 8, 10, 12 years. And I got my first directing gig at 27. We'd done $1 million TV commercial the year before with an LA production company. And then the next year they said, "Hey, Tom," and I'd worked on that obviously as assistant director and the line producer. And so the company or the client says, "Hey, Tom, we'd like to do the next project, but we'd like to do it for about $500,000. Do you think you could help us?" And I said, "Well, yeah, sure." So at 27, they gave me a $600,000 job to go do through my own company, where I made all the decisions, the hiring and firing and all that. And so it was a really cool job. And then I ended up hiring a director of photography that had worked on the project the year before, a guy named Dan Mendel. And if any of you guys are Star Wars or Star Trek fans or watch J.J. Abrams films, Dan has been the director of photography for the last 2 Star Trek and the last 2 Star Wars films, and still is a good personal friend of mine. So that was the first guy that ever worked for me as a cameraman when I was a director. So been very blessed, very lucky to have some incredible experiences. And since then, I've just, I've been a gun for hire. People want to hire me to go make TV commercials, corporate films, that kind of stuff, but usually outdoor stuff. I've been doing stuff in the automotive industry for a long time. That whole outdoor recreation world and field sports, all that, all over the world. So I've been really, really blessed. And after a long time of helping people make millions and millions of dollars, these companies that I've worked for, I kind of felt that, when COVID hit, that maybe there was a different calling coming here, because of course, everything for everybody dried up. And I looked at things and I'm like, I've been looking at trying to do something differently anyway. And I said, maybe I need to do something that maybe gives back. And so that's why a bunch of us got together and we started the Shepherds of Wildlife Society about 2018. We just sat down and said, what? We're out in nature all the time. We see what man's impact in it, and it's not pretty. And there are some shining examples of good things that are going on, but it's the exception. It's not the rule. And so what we decided to do is get together and create a 501c3 nonprofit and donate our content, this incredible photography. I got some wonderful wildlife photographers that have been working with us, guys that have their entire careers that have made their stuff, their photography available to us. And we're basically repurposing an education material. And so my forte, obviously, as I've mentioned, is filmmaking. So we've spent, since 2017, I've been working on this project in Zambia. I was on a conservation, kind of panel discussion with a bunch of different people about conservation issues in Atlanta back in 2016. And when I got done, this fellow came up to me with a strange accent, which I knew it wasn't South African. I know it wasn't, Australian, and it wasn't UK, but it was Zambian. And he started to tell me this story about this chief that had been knocking on his door and wanted him to help her out. It turns out this guy had a side business in the safari hunting industry. And this lady was a chief. She was like, "My people are dying. We don't have any wildlife anymore, but we want you to come and help develop our area because we don't have anybody to help us." And at the time he went to check it out, and there was kids dying of starvation. Of course, the parents eat first, kids eat next. And the wildlife had been poached almost literally out of existence. The national parks and wildlife folks had actually deemed the area game depleted, which means that there wasn't enough wildlife there for anybody to legally hunt. It was a hunting concession area right next to the Lower Zambezi National Park, which is one of those buffer areas to kind of protect the park. but the people that had just been just absolutely, the wildlife resources have been decimated through, and in many cases, local extinction events occurred. I mean, there's species of animals that were there. I mean, they had the big five, lions and elephants and leopard and Cape buffalo and rhino, and the rhinos didn't walk away. The elephants didn't walk away. I mean, there's hardly any buffalo, back then. I mean, there used to be tons of those animals there. And so it's really was a sad story. But the fellow that came to me at this event was talking to me, and he's telling me this story. His name's Roland Norton. And I'm just like, oh my, this is an incredible story, because he had come in, he'd been there for about a year at that point in time. And, he had a dream that he always wanted to help bring something back like this. Because this is not, like I said earlier, this is the norm. I mean, a lot of these areas are, I guess we'll call them overused, and so that they can't be utilized in the wildlife. And, when you don't have people out there protecting the resource, and then you end up having these folks that come in, you get the charcoal, the deforestation because of charcoal production. You get illegal. Now we're seeing a huge problem with Chinese coming in there and just stripping any and everything they can, from minerals to taking, lots of infrastructure jobs they bring in. Of course, they bring their own people to do them, to illegal logging. And so there's a real issue there on the floor on that. So that's where that led me into doing this project. And so now we have this film that I spent about 120 days on the ground over 3.5 years documenting the trials and tribulations. And I have to be honest with you, Brooke. I mean, it was like it's huge ups and downs. And it was like living with somebody with bipolar disorder. You saw some incredible things that were positive, and then you keep seeing these terrible things that are so, so terrible, and documenting it. But, at the end, my goal with this particular project was really to give a voice to those rural indigenous communities, because they don't have one. Nobody knows what's going on in their lives. We're just finishing up about a year of film festivals. We'd submitted it to a bunch of festivals, thinking that we'd be lucky to get into 5 or 10 festivals. We ended up getting into 38 festivals, and there's a dozen more still looking at it. And we've won 20 major awards. I just got back last week from being in Stockholm, Sweden, where we won Best Documentary Feature in the Vastaras Film Festival, which we were up against a Woody Harrelson narrated film called Kiss the Ground, which is about protecting the Earth's soil, topsoil. And then another one was a film about kids in Haiti getting heart surgeries. So, I mean, some really serious stuff. So unbelievable to be recognized that way. I mean, extremely humbling. But, it's just been a great story to see what's happening. And so now we're kind of at that point where, we're moving on to the next phase of this and trying to get this film out to as many people as we can. And it's going to be available on the 27th of November through the 15th of January at killingtheshepherd.com. It's an exclusive digital cinema release. And then when that's done, then we're going to have it available on DVD, Blu-ray, different platforms, the advertising platforms, the streaming platforms, like I don't know if we'll be on Netflix or not. We'll see what happens, but we've got a bunch of platforms that we're going to be putting it on. And the cool thing about this is I've had government people come and talk to me. We did a private screening back in December with the whole upper leadership of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Wow. Congrats. That's
not
amazing.
The political people, but the full timers, the staff people. And then since then, I've done some private screenings with other groups that are wildlife oriented groups or wildlife centric, conservation centric groups. And now, I mean, I've had a couple congressmen talk to me. One of the ranking Republicans in the House Natural Resources Committee has expressed an interest in trying to showcase the film to the entire Natural Resources Committee. And then it's also at the same time, I've had the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, the president of that, come to me, the congressman from North Carolina, Congressman Hudson, wanting to show it not only to their caucus, but also to the Black Caucus in Congress. So, and we created a 30-minute version of the film, which it's dynamite also. And so that was designed to take into schools for educational purposes. And really it's about telling that story of this rural indigenous community and the things that they have to deal with, but also their story of survival and their story of living with their wildlife resources. Because really what happens at the end of the day is if people don't care about the resource, they're not going to take care of it. I don't care if we're in Montana or if we're in Colorado or if we're in Florida or New York or we're in Spain or Africa or Kazakhstan. So we always have to look for solutions where people have a voice in what's happening and how the management's occurring, but they have to see some sort of benefit. And that's what this film is all about, was the different types of things that occurred, the partnerships that the Nortons, through their Mikasa Safaris company, built with the chief and with the community, because you can't just do things for people. I mean, most people, especially rural folks, they're proud, they're independent. They're not looking for you for handouts. That's not what they want. But what they want is a voice, and they want to be able to see positive change, positive development. And one of the coolest things that happened to me on this film was the first time I came back in early 2017, my father-in-law, is a heart doctor in Bakersfield, California, was visiting my wife and the kids. And I happened to show him some video. And one of the videos was about a school that I filmed. And it's just an open air thatched roof, just poles with a thatched roof on it. And the kids are just sitting there in their, ripped up clothing, whatever else. And the teacher's not really a teacher. He's just an older person that has some education. He's not getting paid. They don't have proper books and education materials. They don't have desks. They're all just sitting in the dirt and standing around leaning up against poles in here. And they rotate, the kids 2 or 3 times through this thing. So the younger kids go for a few hours in the morning, and then the older kids, and then the oldest kids, kind of just, so they're only in school for a few hours every day, or, 4 or 5 days out of the week. And so I showed him all this, and he had started about 12 years ago a nonprofit called African Children's Schools. And yeah, I knew about it, but I wasn't like, okay, I mean, this is kind of out of my wheelhouse. It's not on my radar. But I showed him this stuff, and he's like, hey, they need a school. And I said, well, that's the school. It's right there. He says, no, they need a real school. And I was just like, what do you mean a real school? I mean, with bricks and windows and doors and desks and uniforms and, a real roof on it. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right. He said, can we talk to these people? Can we talk to the safari operator? And I said, yeah, we could probably WhatsApp them. And so the next day we're on the phone talking to the Nortons, and I'm like, so my father-in-law, he raises money to build schools in the remote bush in Africa. At this point in time, I think he'd built about 40 schools, mostly in Ethiopia, but also in some in South Africa. I think one in South Africa. But the long and the short of it is within a week, African Children's Schools had wired Mikasa Safaris half the money with a promise to pay for all of 3 brand new school classrooms with teachers' residences, latrines, uniforms, and teacher salaries for a year, because these aren't government schools. These are just bush schools for the village. And so that I was like, wow. And so out of that, I mean, just case in point, one of the school that I had filmed the first trip I went there, that school had about 80 kids going there. So they built it with 1 classroom block, and then kind of a teacher's office there that's lockable and whatnot. And so they bought uniforms, 120 uniforms or something like that. And within 3 months of that school opening up, once they got it built and painted and everything set, they had like over 300 kids show up for school. There was kids coming in dugouts across the river to get to this thing. And there was kids that had never or would never have gone to school where were now going to school. And probably one of the coolest things for me is part of their curriculum is to learn how to speak English. It is the international language of business. And so now, because I brought my cameras over there and filmed something and showed it to someone, look at how many people's lives have been changed. And it's not just the kids now, their lives for the rest of their lives, and then their kids can be changed. So it's just an extremely powerful what can happen when you do things for the right reasons. I mean, so I've talked a lot. I know we need to have a question here. So I need to take a breath. I'm going to have a drink. And Brooke, it's your turn.
Sounds good. That was an incredible recap. Thank you so much. I have to ask this first. Is this your first conservation film of this style?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been in the film business, like I said, my whole life. I've done a lot of productions but it's almost all been short format stuff, nothing in this genre. I certainly haven't gone through the film festival world, which that was interesting to say the least. Here's this Montana guy that, I'm climbing mountains all the time and getting in boats and floating rivers and catching fish and getting on horses and going all over the place and riding snowmobiles and ATVs and big trucks. So being in downtown New York City is a little bit different. So, or Stockholm and some of these other places we've been. So yeah, this was my first feature documentary in this genre. And I'll tell you, the learning curve for me was straight up and down. So I'm just shocked that we've done so well with the film and it's gotten the accolades that it has, because I'll tell you what, it was definitely a learning experience for me. And I'm really excited. You know, our board, the Shepherds of Wildlife Society, is so happy with this film that they've gotten me to agree to do 5 or 6 more. And so, you know, we're busy trying to raise the funds so that we can continue to keep this wave moving, because, you know, film and video can really reach people in a way that few things can. I mean, photography is worth 1,000 words, but, you know, every second I'm shooting 24 pictures. And so those things that we can document and that we can expose to people that don't have access to this, because the biggest reason why we created the Shepherds of Wildlife Society, and the biggest reason why I'm doing what I'm doing today, is because we see in our modern Western civilization a huge disconnect when it comes to nature. Most people don't know even where their food comes from. They don't understand how this process works. They don't understand. I mean, they wake up in the morning, they flip a switch, they expect the lights to come on. They don't care where electricity comes from. Then they walk in the bathroom, flush the toilet, out of sight, out of mind. The next big decision of the day, is it a chai latte or a caramel macchiato?
Right.
That's not real for 2/3 of the world. Yet we, as modern Western society, seem to think that we should be dictating how everything should exist on this planet, and we don't understand. We're loving things to death. You know, we're causing the destruction of habitat, and we're just making a lot of bad decisions as a society, when there are things that, you know, I understand emotions. You know, I have a father, I have kids, and I mean, some of the things I saw when I was in Africa, especially the child brides. I mean, I have 3 girls, 2 teenage girls, and then a sub 10-year-old. And I mean, when you're 12 or 13 years old in the Lawano, and they don't have, these are subsistence farmers, and they have a crop that fails because the rains didn't rain, or the baboons and the army ants ate most of their food, most of their maize crop or sorghum crop. You don't have anywhere else to turn, because the government doesn't have money. The UN's not there. There's no NGOs, you know, bringing bags of mealie meal for these people. They have nothing. So that's why they have to resort to the poaching in order to survive. But when you have a girl that's that age and she reaches puberty, she's worth 30 bags of maize. And people sell their daughters. They have 8 or 9 or 10 kids. And to give it perspective, you know, we did the same thing in this continent back in the 16 and 1700s. You know, even in the 1800s, early 1900s, because, you know, we had disease and we didn't have the medical facilities we had here. Kids worked out on the farm or the ranch, and sometimes kids didn't make it. You know, they got, you know, got sick or they got hurt. So you ended up having a bunch of kids so you could take care of everything. But the same thing's going in Africa right now, in these rural, you know, areas, these communities. You know, that's a tough life. It's a hard scrabble life, and it's just you know, it's just mind numbing to see the fact that people would potentially sell their daughter to a man who might be 10, 15, 20 years older. He might be her second or third wife for this guy, but he has the ability to pay for it. And that's just the way it is. So, you know, this project has been really a big eye opener for me. And like I said, the learning curve has been huge.
So was that your first time being somewhere where you saw that?
No, I've spent a lot of time in Africa throughout my life. I'm just, you know, productions and other things I've worked on. So, you know, I've been on a lot of safaris. I've seen a lot of what's going on in different parts of Africa, but I had never, you know, when you go to it as, let's call yourself a tourist, you go there and you just see, you know, oh, I do that's comfortable. I hang out with these people doing this. But, you know, on this project, I mean, I'm spending time with the chief and her crawl, and we're sitting there having conversations. I don't have any of the Mikasa people with me. I mean, I'm letting the chief's advisor, who was a headmistress of a school before she became her advisor, who spoke fluent English, and the teacher didn't speak English at all. She was actually illiterate. Didn't learn how to sign her name till about 5 years into her reign as chief. And so just put a big X whenever she had to sign something in the first few years. But yeah, it's an interesting experience. But, you know, I spent a lot of time in Mexico, and there's parts of Mexico that are, I mean, honestly, it's impoverishment. You know, it's just where these people don't have access to clean water. They don't have access to regular, you know, healthcare. They don't have access to, you know, getting an education. Probably I would call it the most basic things that we take for granted, but the most basic human rights. And so that's part of what we're trying to do, is trying to reconnect modern society, that Western civilized world, so that they understand that they make decisions that can have very adverse effects, not only on the wildlife, but the people. And if the people don't benefit from taking care of the wildlife and their habitat, then guess what? It's going to go by the way of the dodo bird. And I have seen all kinds. I've flown in private airplanes in a lot of parts of Southern Africa. And when you leave these wildlife areas that are protected from logging and slashing and burning and illegal grazing, there's nothing. I mean, I flew from the Sabe Valley Conservancy a couple of years ago, which is in the southeast portion of Zimbabwe, up to Harare, the capital, which is in the northeastern section of the country. I don't know, 300 miles by air. And as soon as we left the boundary of the conservancy, there wasn't enough vegetation on the ground to rub two sticks together. I mean, I don't think there was enough on the ground for an antelope to live in. You know, it was just all over grazed. There was nothing but these little subsistence fields. And the thing is the ground in that part of Africa, Southern Africa, is not the best thing to grow corn. Corn is from North America. It was brought over by the Portuguese when they were doing their slave trading, but they brought it over from North America. And they use that as a staple food. And it's been adopted by just about every community, every group of people in Africa now. Mealie meal, ground corn is the basic staple, and everybody loves it. But corn takes a lot of water, and it takes a lot of nutrients in the soil in order to grow. And that's not something that's very in great supply in Africa in a lot of these areas we're talking about. And there's other opportunities. I mean, these people could do cash crops. I mean, we've looked at all kinds of things trying to help them out. And in the case with the Nortons, they actually built a fish farm. And so they built 6 30,000 gallon tanks. Each one's 30,000 gallons above ground. So, I mean, it's this crazy looking, big, huge tanks. And they grow tilapia and barbel catfish in there, which are native to that area. And, the people don't get anything for free. They have to pay the cost for it. But if there's extra that they have, they're able to sell that in the fish markets in Lusaka. And they're about breaking even on the thing. But one of the coolest things about it is that not only were the wildlife, the mammals eradicated for the most part by poaching, but the fish also were too, because they kept using smaller and smaller nets. And eventually you catch fish that aren't even at an age that are mature enough to breed. So you don't get any more fish. And so the river was almost devoid of fish. And so because this fish farm is raising fish that is the same fish that was in the river, they've been putting and restocking the river, and the populations of fish have been exploding too. So it's a great story about what man can do if they start using their noggin instead of trying to destroy what's there by overusing it. And again, there's examples of this in human history from the beginning of time. I mean, just look what we did here in North America. Our Northern European colonization of North America, we came around here and we steamrolled everything. And we utilized it to survive. Then we killed it because we could, market hunting. And then we turned around and wanted to get rid of the habitat because we could go ahead and, make more progress in our lives, build more cities, more churches, more, buildings and stuff. And it's like, people are like, wow, that's crazy. And I said, well, you live in a house, right? Oh yeah. Okay. Well, that used to be wildlife habitat. Now that wood that made your house, that used to be wildlife habitat. So y'all got to think that we all have an impact all the time. And the question is we just have to figure out ways to make sure that we save a place for wildlife and for the habitat out there. Because without the habitat, we're not going to have any wildlife.
Absolutely. And one thing that I absolutely love about this film, and so anybody that's been listening to the podcast for a while, has been following me, knows how much of an advocate I am for conservation travel, sustainable travel. And your film highlights this to a T. I mean, it is what came in and saved this whole environment, the whole Soli people. Like, this was the way, and the amazing chieftainess, this was her solution that she found and that she wanted to pursue. And even as I was watching the film with my husband and it was over, I looked at him, I'm like, now do you understand what I do? Because it's so hard. Well, how do I want to say this? It is so hard to truly understand why someone wants to go into this field until you see a film like yours, until you understand the power that it actually has, to see from the very beginning, because it looked like you were there right at the start when they had nothing. And the chieftainess, she was like, I need to do something for my people because my people are literally dying. And seeing the young girls, I mean, like, when Yeah, watching especially that one girl that you highlighted that was clearly maybe 14 and pregnant and had a baby. I
Yeah,
was definitely,
Nyla Zulu. Yeah, no, and
whew,
it's heavy stuff.
it hit me hard. Also having being a woman, traveling abroad a lot and going to these rural places, and then having sisters, having nieces. It's hard to see. And so I'm really glad that you showcased all of that. And the next question I had on this is, why do you think the chieftainess went to Roland specifically? Why did she go to Masaka Safari? Why did she think that they were going to essentially be her savior and for her people's savior? What do you think that was?
That's a great question. And I've obviously spent a lot of time with Roland and his son, Alistair, and his wife, Anne, and his daughter, and, and all the people that work there, Jaakko Schwanapol, their general manager. And, two things occurred there. I think, first of all, when she knocked on the door, he's sitting in his office. He owned an import-export business. So the copper mining industry, that's the big money maker for that country. And it's in the north part of the country, just north of Lusaka up on the border with the Congo. And so they've got this whole copper belt there. And so Roland's business, his main day-to-day 9-to-5 job was doing import export. And that's what he did. And he built the company up over, I think, the last 20 or 25 years from scratch. And so they're moving heavy equipment, vehicles, all that kind of stuff, importing them in and out for the mining industry. But his father had immigrated back right after World War II. His father had been a gunner on the HMS Hood in World War II. And if you have any World War II history about nautical and maritime affairs in the war, remember the Bismarck, which was a major battleship that Hitler had commissioned, and it had the biggest guns around, and the HMS Hood was in a battle with it, I think a couple of other British battleships, and it took a couple direct hits and sank to the bottom with almost all hands on deck, dead. And his father, I think, was one of about 150 men who survived out of all, I think, close to 2,000 sailors that were on the HMS Hood. So after the war, his father immigrated to what was then called Northern Rhodesia, which is Zambia today. And he got a job working for the wildlife department. And of course, it's a colonial government. So, I mean, it's kind of imposing their will and whatnot. But he was out there, the one that was demarcating all the national parks and wildlife refuges. They're lining up all this stuff and saying, hey, we need to protect some of this stuff. Now, there's pros and cons to that. But at the same time, that's what Roland grew up, was that conservation ethos of like, hey, we need to protect these areas because if we don't, they're going to disappear. And so being in that, his father introduced him to hunting. And so he spent a lot of time as a youth with his father out there because, I mean, they hunted game to survive while they're out there because there's no McDonald's down the road. There's no Walmart or anything like that. So it's just a totally different world. And so with that, he became passionate about hunting. So his side gig was he became a professional hunter, which means he was a guide, and if you came to Zambia or what was, he was in Zambia at that point in time when he was a young boy, you could hire someone to go on a 2 or 3 or 4 week trip to go and see all this game and hunt it. And so he did that on the side. And I think for about 20 years, and I think he's still doing it, he's been the chairman of the board of the Zambia Professional Hunters Association, which is a professional group, like you got lawyers and doctors in various areas. So the entire country, they all have this group where they're able to help each other and be better at what they do and create a voice for their industry. So he was well known. I mean, it's like, the last 2 presidents, Roland's like, yeah, I'm friends with them. Like, okay, cool. All right. Africa's a lot different than where it is here in the United States, but it's like, hey, do you think we get an interview with the president? I say, yeah, maybe, but yeah. So I never asked the first chief Shika, Lucina Tembo, that question. I spent a fair amount of time with her before she passed. But that was one question I never asked. But my gut feeling on it, and based on how he explained to me, and even his wife Ann said, Roland came home one day and said this chief was knocking on the door, and she wants me to take over a depleted game area. It's like saying, hey, we want you to take over McDonald's, but we don't have anything in it, no food, no nothing. But you can have the building. Hope you're good. Good luck. Maybe the equipment's in there, so all the basics there, but there's no food, right, and no staff. That's a good analogy to what he was dealing with. But I think because of Roland's experience and the things he learned from his father on the conservation side of things, he's very passionate about wildlife, very passionate about the land, and he's passionate about the people. Both Roland and Alistair are fluently speak Soli, and Soli is only spoken by about 90,000 people in the world. Wow. So it's not a very big group of people, but he's been in this area. I think he was there in the late 80s. I think he did a couple of hunting safaris there. So he saw what the land was capable of before it was poached out of existence. And the Luana was a beautiful valley. It is not out of Africa. It's not the Tanzanian, Ngorongoro crater and the big
Serengeti.
It's not the Serengeti. It's a thick Mopani forest. Elephants had created some openings here and there, and beautiful river runs through it. It's full of crocodiles. It's one of the most dangerous rivers in all of Africa for crocodiles. And they figure about 40 people a year are killed in this valley by crocodiles, all up and down it. So about 120 miles from one end to the other. But yeah, I think he had this passion, and he's told me he had a passion for this. And he and Alistair, she said, "Hey, I need some help. Nobody else is out here." And he's like, "Yeah." And she goes, and what she said to him, she goes, "I heard that you were honest. I want you to come out and see what we're doing." And he's like, well, he's not the government. He's like, "Well, yeah, sure. We'll come out and take a look, but I'm not making any promises." And so he and Alistair went out there. I want to say it was 2014. They first went out there to take a look. And, it's an area where the existing model was that you make a bid to lease this land for 5 to 7 years. And then if you accept your bid, then your bid includes a certain amount of money you're going to allocate to the community, certain things you may be doing for development or projects for the community. Obviously, you're going to, if there is hunting that occurs, then there's the money that's generated from that, which will pay those things. And it's not just a percentage. There's like things that they have to agree to pay for throughout the entire term of the lease. Well, of course, this area didn't have anything. There were some pockets of antelope species, impala, some kudu, some few water bucks, some bush buck. There were still some lions, some leopards, not really, but just little pockets here and there. Mm-hmm. But there was that's all that survived for pockets. But there was hartebeest, gone, locally extinct. Cape buffalo, once in a while, an old Dugga boy or two might come across the river from someplace far knows where and walk around, but there used to be thousands of them. Elephants, used to be lots of elephants there, gone. They were shot, and if they weren't shot, they left. Rhino, they were shot. So locally extinct. Elephant, locally extinct. There's actually a sable there called a Hansen sable, which is, as I understand it, it was discovered in the 1950s by some game, one of these game guys from the national parks. And it's the only place that exists in all of Africa, and nobody's seen it. Now, there is an interesting note. There was a national parks game scout 2 years ago that said he saw one. And this guy, Roland, said, "Hey, you sure you didn't? There are some roan. There's some small pockets of roan."
Yeah, I saw one in the film, and I was like, "Oh my God, that's some roan!"
And he goes, "Buona, no, I've been a game scout for 24 years. I know the difference between a roan and a sable." So he says it was a sable. So, but it's very rocky. It's very mountainous, hilly, not like big mountains like Rocky Mountains in Colorado or Montana, but very mountainous. A lot of rocks, a lot of brush, a lot of stuff that likes to sting you. I got stung by the first night I was in their safari camp before they had it built. We were sleeping in pup tents, and middle of the night I woke up about 1 o'clock in the morning. I've been stung twice by a scorpion.
Oh God.
Yeah, so it was interesting, but it's a really rugged place. But it's beautiful in itself. And the fact that the wildlife of just what we've seen with the wildlife, when I first got there, I was there back in May of 2017. I didn't see 20 animals in 2 weeks. 20.
That's crazy to think.
And I was
looking. It really is.
Yeah. I found skulls here and there. We found some villages that looked like they'd fallen apart from 50 years ago, yet they'd been abandoned 2-3 years earlier. Well, 2 years, in 2015 is when Roland came. So, really to answer your question is I think Chief Shigaba, she saw that someone that she could trust, that would put her people, would help her. Because again, these people aren't looking for handouts, a hand to help lift them, to help them up the first couple rungs of the ladder to prosperity. And that's really what they were able to do. And it was a good timing for Roland. He ended up at about that same time selling his half of his import-export business to his partner. So he had some money, and we're not people here that had millions and millions of dollars. Just they had some money, and they were in a situation where he talked to his family and they said, "You know what, we could invest about $350,000 into this thing without getting any return. But after that, we've got to see some sort of business, some kind of deal, whether it be the fish farm or be the safari business or whatever it was. And so they went ahead and they put a proposal together. And the problem with Africa, especially in Southern Africa, almost all of these lease tenures on these concessions are 5, 7, 10 years. Well, you're talking about an area that doesn't have any resources per se, as far as wildlife resources go. And it doesn't have any game scouts. It doesn't have any radio repeater towers, doesn't have trucks, doesn't have training, doesn't have firearms for the anti-poaching efforts, doesn't have all the things you have to do it. And that's a huge investment. Costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. In some cases, if it's big enough, you can spend millions of dollars on it.
Easy.
And so they made this commitment, and Roland went and had a meeting with the chiefs and then the senior chief, because the kingdom of Shekabeta is one part of 4 other kingdoms, or 3 other kingdoms, for a total of 4. So the Soli people are made up of 4 kingdoms, and Shekabeta is one of them. And so, they even had the big chief there, who's a woman also, and all these ladies and all these people from the community, all these elders. And he's like, well, this is what I want to do. We want a 20-year lease, and we want a 5-year automatic renewal, because it's going to take 10 years just to maybe get this thing resurrected. And thankfully it's less than that now, but they had some stipulations onto it, which the government had never, ever approved before. The National Parks and Wildlife had never approved anything like this. The other thing is when they first arrived there, I said the kids were all dying. A lot of the children were starving to death. And so instead of spending money on infrastructure, things that they agreed to in the original agreement, which they got there in late 2015, early 2016, which they were there right before the rainy season starts. Rainy season starts in November, December, it goes through till about April. And you can't do anything in this country, because when it's wet, you can't even drive a vehicle because you'll sink out of sight. So there's a window that they had to use. But when they got there, the kids were starving to death. They didn't have food. And so they stopped what they're doing on infrastructure, and they put all their money into buying mealie meal. And they literally brought truckload after truckload after truckload and dispersed it out there, just as a way to keep people alive. Like I said, the UN's not out there. There's no NGOs, UNICEF. None of these people exist. All they had was the Nortons and their willingness to see something through. And they made a commitment to do that. So I guess you call it the Chiefs Royal Council, and the chief were so happy with this. They said, you know what, if you're going to go ahead and build this fish farm, if you're going to do all the things you say you're going to do, you've already shown us you're willing to help us survive. We're going to give you a lease. You can't buy land in Zambia. Even your house, if you buy a house, you get a lease. It's 99 years. And that's your plot of land with your house on it. And
Is it owned by the government?
That's just the way the government is. It's just the way they do things here. It's like it'd be like not getting title to your house here, but you got a promissory note that you get to keep the land for 99 years, which is transferable. And so what they ended up doing is the local community, through the chief and the Royal Council, deeded them about I don't know, maybe 40 or 50 acres underneath the ground, underneath the fish farm, so they could secure the development. That's a key thing there, because if you're going to go ahead and put a bunch of money down to build something, if you're in the United States, you're going to build a subway, you sure as heck don't want to build it on somebody else's land. So they were able to secure that. But they also got another land lease for about the same size for where they built their permanent safari camp, which was about, I don't know, it's about a 2-hour drive, hour and a half, 2-hour drive from where the fish farm is. And it's in an area where the last pockets of wildlife existed. It's the best habitat, and everything had not been eradicated, but I mean, to like 80% of it had been eradicated. And so they built their safari camp there. But so now 2 really important parts of this, Brooke, is now they have commitment for the government for 20, 25 years. That's a generation. And they have a commitment to protect that investment on the land by having the land. And it's, like I said, it's transferable. So 10, 20, 30 years from now, or whatever that time period is, they decide, hey, our family's not going to do this anymore, but we'd like to go ahead and have somebody else come in and run the same operation. They could turn around and sell it. Now they could turn around and sell the fish farm to the community if they wanted to. It's a transferable business at this point in time. So, it's just a different mindset. And that's the problem I've seen in Africa. I know you've been there. Most people don't think real far out. Urban planning is not something anybody does. Life planning is not really a whole lot what people do. It's literally trying to exist from day to day. And so, it's partly taking our kind of, I'll call it our Northern European background. Most of us have ancestry that grew up in places where it was cold. Well, we had to plan to make sure we had enough food to get through the winter and seed to plant the next year, or, meat and things like that. We had to figure out how to preserve it. So, we did a lot of incredible things like inventing refrigeration. So we're in a situation right now where I think what the Nortons have done is I think they've changed that whole model, that business model. I mean, the safari hunting business, I know a lot of people say, oh, it's terrible and this, that, and everything. And I'm like, guys, you don't understand what's really going on here. I mean, these people are in an area, they're protecting an area because they have a vested interest in it. So we don't have, poaching going on, willy-nilly around here. They protect it because if they don't have any animals, they got nothing to hunt. And of course, if the community is a partner in that, then they can see benefits in this. And I watched this firsthand. It's not like people say, hey, if you're going to go out and hunt an iconic animal like a lion, let's just say, I know it turns a lot of people off, but if they hunt one lion out of 80 lions in the Luano, that's an $80,000 hunt. And that $80,000 doesn't go off to some bank account in Panama. Not like our politicians or the European politicians, taking your tax money and sticking it in their own personal bank accounts. But that money gets spent right there in Zambia. Portion of it gets spent within the community for all the things I talked about. They built clinics, health clinics. It could go into building schools. It could go into hiring jobs. Of course, they have the fish farm going on. They've got about 180 people working for them in the community. And I know that you can do a multiplier on that. Anybody who's got an economics degree will tell you that multiplier is huge. It's probably somewhere close to 1,000 people are positively influenced by this. Not to mention kids getting taught English and getting an education out in the bush for the first time. So there's a lot of multipliers in here that are positive. But, also one of the big things that people understand is that in Africa, we have national parks, and everybody talks about Kruger and Kafue and, all the different parks that are out there. But I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 400% more land. I mean, there's a huge amount of land that surrounds these national parks that's designated for the hunting concessions. And those areas, and that brings in, I think the number is that it brings in about between $300 and $400 million. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's almost zero footprint. There's not a noise pollution. There's not 10,000 people walking through to take photographs and walking up on a lion on a kill, a pride lions on a kill with 46 trucks all parked around with people taking pictures and stuff. And now you got wildlife it's been habituated to man. It's no longer wild. And so, there's a pros and cons to both sides of it. But one thing that I've seen in these really remote areas is that the hunting safari business really does provide a buffer, a way to protect these areas. And let's face it, that the national parks, just like here in the United States, they're meant to be like the breeding grounds for these wildlife species. When the animal populations, we see this in Montana with the grizzly bear, when the populations in the wilderness expand beyond the carrying capacity of the land, they naturally push out into other areas. We're not seeing grizzly bears 200-300 miles east of the Rocky Mountain front, out in the rolling prairie where Lewis and Clark saw them when they came here back in 1803, 1804. So, but that's natural. And the same thing happens in Africa. When these animals exceed the carrying capacity, they have to go somewhere to survive. And so they continue, and that's a healthy ecosystem. And that's the big thing is, what I see this business doing and what they're doing, hunting is one part of it. The fish farm's another. There has to be other economic things that occur. And that's why I'm saying that I think what the Nortons have done is kind of, they're starting to change that model. It used to be you're in for a short period of time. You did what you could to make as much money as you could. You hired a handful of people. You dropped off some meat once in a while, which again, it's only a window that you're there because in the rainy season, might be 6 months if you're lucky, but it's usually not. But now you're here full time. You got to be there for 20, 25 years. You get protection of your land, your development. The land is transferable on a lease. You become part of the community. And that's what I've seen about the Nortons. I mean, like I said earlier, both Roland and Alistair speak fluent Soli. They're just a part of, he's kind of an advisor to the chief. The chief's like, so what do you think? What should we do now? What we'd like here? And these communities would like to have this and that. And he's like, well, we need to be careful with the wildlife. And with progress also comes good things, but also bad things. One of the things I've seen in Africa, and I've seen in other places too, when you have something that's been downtrodden for so long and then it comes back, it attracts, it's like moths to light. you get bad actors that come in that say, hey, I want a piece of this. And I've witnessed some interesting things here. But of course, our two chiefs in this film, and I won't spoil you guys on what the final outcome is this, but they're under a lot of duress. There's been a long history of outsiders coming in and trying to purchase land, kind of in an illegal way, or, maybe just kind of sleight of hand. But, you don't get in from South Africa and try to make a pitch to buy up, a third of this concession area, the land to turn around and sell for farming, which we've already discussed doesn't work very well. But there's people willing to buy it. You don't do that unless somebody in government gives you hey, okay. Well, the only way the government does is because somebody's, sliding, greasing their way rails there. So it's been an incredible story. There's great things going on. We're continuing to go back and film. A lot of people, after they watch the film, they're like, so what happened? What happened to this person? What happened to that person? It's like, I get all these questions. What happened to this chief? What happened to this game scout that was a poacher? Now game scout, and so what we're doing is one of the cool things from this, Brooke, is that I have had scientists and researchers on wildlife, conservation biologists and whatnot, come to me. Professor Adam Hart from the University of Gloucestershire. He's also a BBC presenter, does some incredible radio shows for BBC on these wildlife conservation issues and human wildlife conflict. Amy Dickman, Wild Crew, and from the University of Oxford, Lion Landscapes. I mean, we've had a whole bunch of people come to us and say, hey, is there any way we could do some research in the Luano? I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like building schools. I'm like, yeah, sure. I figure we can figure that out. So now we're actually working on a program right now, trying to raise some money for the Shepherds of Wildlife for research. We have a bunch of initiatives. That's one of them, where we literally want to get researchers on the ground. One of the guys is an expert in leopard research, and he's just finished up a program at the University of Wyoming on deer and elk migrations. And he's got 120 GPS collars sitting in his office. He says, all we need to do is come up with the money to put new batteries in this and we can have them. And I mean, I don't know, it's like $100 a collar, $120 a collar. And I'm like, oh, okay, let's keep those. So
yes,
we still have to raise the money to go out and trap animals and dart them and have to have a vet and all that kind of stuff. And then you got to put he wants to collar a whole bunch of impala and kudus, which are the primary prey species for the leopard. But so there's some really cool things that come of this stuff. So our goal is to continue filming the Luano and bring in the researchers and their stories and what they're seeing on the science of it, the thing. Of course, the people and how things are progressing and all that. It's a great human interest story. And of course, the wildlife, 10 years. It's been 2015 since they initiated. So we're into our 6th year. We'll probably in another 4 or 5 years have another film on this thing. So we'll be able to see what's happened after a decade. And it should be really interesting to be able to see that. And my goal too, Brooke, is just tell the story as it happens. So many films I've watched. The Jackson Wild, the film festival, asked me to do some preliminary judging this year, and there were some incredible films that I judged. But there was an awful lot of films that I felt were nothing but propaganda. They just didn't have the chops about them. Didn't have the right experts. They didn't have any experts in some cases. Some of them felt like it was nothing but a Google attempt to tell the story of wildlife conservation. But and that really brings me to a point. Conservation is a word that people have to understand. It's being misused. Heavily. There's two things. We have conservation, we have preservation. Okay. Fortress conservation is preservation in my book. Preservation means, hey, hands off. Let's let God figure it out. Let's let nature figure it out. I did an interview with the late Valeris Geist, Dr. Valeris Geist, 23 books on wildlife conservation, one of the top experts in the world, thousands of peer-reviewed papers, mostly on North American species. And he flat out told me, he's like, Tom, if you think God's going to sort it out or nature, it never has and never will. And the reality is we have to take the responsibility because there isn't a square foot of this planet that we don't have some sort of impact. It doesn't matter if you believe in human caused global warming or not. You go to the highest point of Mount Everest, there's trash everywhere. There's used oxygen belts. Hell, there's over 100 dead bodies. You go to the lowest point of the earth, which is the Marianas Trench in the South Pacific. And ever since that Fukushima nuclear reactor deal with the tsunami, I figured it had to be something bad down there. Well, sure enough, a few years ago, Nat Geo financed an expedition, and they sampled the biologic creatures down in there. And they found out that these things have been exposed to the worst pollutants in the most polluted rivers in China today. That's our legacy. And I've been to China, and it's not a fun place. So Are we going to leave this place better than we found it? And that's really what we're trying to do through the Shepherds of Wildlife Society. That's what I'm trying to do as a filmmaker. I'm trying to give a voice to these folks that don't have a voice, these indigenous rural communities that if they don't buy into your conservation, and again, conservation is the wise use of a natural resource. And if you tell me it's not, then I'm going to say, okay, well, let's look it up in the dictionary. And what does it say in Webster's? It says exactly that. And it uses two examples. One is when you run out of water in the tap in Tempe, Arizona, or LA or Cape Town, what does the government tell you to do? They tell you to practice wise water conservation.
Conservation.
Exactly. Then the next thing they say is wildlife conservation. It's a renewable resource. If we take care of it, we can manage it, we can keep it in harmony. We have to work in ecosystems. And if we work in ecosystems, I mean, the big ecosystem's the earth, you know, and if we want to be able to have our future generations live on this planet in a healthy way where we can have biodiversity, you know, clean water and healthy forest and vibrant wildlife populations, then we need to give people that are on the ground that are dealing with these things the benefit of the doubt, because quite frankly, they know more than 99.9% of the rest of us in the Western modern world. And, you know, we've got groups out there that are, I mean, I just read an article today that was sent to me from actually, I don't know if it came through the African Union, but there is a move, a front right now for these communities are banding together and saying, screw you, Western world. If you want to have this, 30 for 30 thing and the 2030 UN and all these things you want, you're not going to get it because we're not going to have it here if you're not going to allow us to sustainably utilize our resources. And then they're right. It's not like it's some kind of rocket science thing here. It doesn't take a brainiac to figure it out. But, you know, part of this whole ecosystem management deal is the sustainable utilization, which includes some limited hunting that goes on because it creates an income. But again, what the Nortons are doing, they're doing it right. Not only do they have that aspect of it, but they have the aspect where they've got so many parts and pieces that are involved with the community and the things that they're able to help them with. So that, you know, I could envision these people one day just doing all this themselves. So they could do this themselves as long as they got the right people leading them and they have the right infrastructure in place. But the existing stuff we have going on with the hunting industry in Africa, they've got to change what they're doing. And they got to look to what like the Nortons are doing, because it's a lot more palatable to most folks if they understand. You know, it's like, I know we talked about hunting a lion. It's a terrible thing from 99% of the people that are listening to this. But I think people need to understand that one lion out of 80 or 100, and that might be in the Lawano, and they haven't hunted any lions there, you know, so but they may do someday down the road if they get quota from the government. But I liken it to the rat analogy. When you have a rat in your house, Brooke, what do you do to it?
Get rid of it.
You kill it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And get rid of any way you can. Now the rat's worth $50,000. What do you do now?
It's a little different.
You raise a whole shitload of rats, don't you?
Yeah.
Well, that is it. Now it's oversimplified, but that is exactly what's going on with these, whether it be Argali sheep in the stands or different parts of the world or Mexico. These animals are and science has told us that anywhere up to, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 7% of any given population could be sustainably harvested without having any adverse effect, not only the reproduction of that family, the population numbers, but also the DNA, you know, being able to pass on those good genes. And so in this day and age, we don't have to go out and collect our food. We can go to the grocery store. Okay. But the problem with that is that think of all the things we eat that really aren't very good for us. You know, I mean, the stuff that's full of drugs and steroids and, you know, all those things that we have going on there. And at the end of the day, would you want to have GMO, you know, organic, clean meat? And one of the things they found in Southern Africa, these animals survive better and live better on that land and that environment than our domesticated animals, because they haven't been on the land for tens of thousands of years. And so they understand, and they have a less of an impact than having a whole pile of cows or a pile of pigs or a pile of sheep or goats or something than you would have otherwise. So, you know, I mean, I think there's, you know, if we really want this place to be a better place, I think we ought to think about trying to have as many deer and elk and as many kudu and as many lions and elephants we can, because the more we have, that means the healthier our environment is.
Absolutely. That was wonderful. You hit so many points. And there's one that, well, there's two that I definitely want to also just reiterate and talk about more. And one is definitely going back to hunting as a form of conservation. And I used to be one of those ignorant people, and I'm sorry if this becomes offensive that I just said ignorant to anybody listening, because you're like, fuck you, I don't know, I can't imagine hunting in any way, shape, or form. And I understand that feeling because I used to have that exact same thought. And what really started to change my mind is when I started to understand that when hunting is done properly, with good quotas, with great guides who understands the wildlife and understands which individuals
And
are
science is
allowed to
involved.
be harvested,
Yep.
then the money that can come in from harvesting that one animal can protect the entire rest of the population. So it's
Yep.
like, so what's the actual goal here? If your goal is for wildlife conservation, which is great, you don't want to see one dead lion, which I'm that way. Like, I cannot fathom taking a rifle and shooting a lion. I can't.
Just remember what conservation is. It's the
Right.
wise use of a natural resource.
Exactly.
So what you're talking about is preservation of the lion, not the
Right.
conservation of the lion.
Right. And so to go back to that point
Mhm.
is, since I personally can't do that, I can't relate to someone who can. What I can relate though to is conserving the entire population. If one male who has lived his life, he has sired many, many, many babies,
Yep.
he has been pushed out of his pride, and he is up for quota, and then he then, by being taken from this population, then protects the rest, well then go for it. And just like you said, having the local people have a say in this as well. If like they feel that this is the best way for their wildlife population to be conserved and for them to have a voice, because that's one thing about your film that I really loved. Like, they saw that as the answer, and that is what they felt, having this hunting come back in as a solution to their community and to sustainably harvest their wildlife and use their wildlife in that way. And so I really just want to take a second to chat on that too, because I especially think with the younger generation not being really in touch, or because I come from a hunting family, I come from a hunting area. And so I understand, I mean, I love white-tailed deer. There's something about a good white-tailed jerky that's just so freaking tasty, and elk and everything. And sometimes it's really hard to understand why somebody would want to do hunting tourism or allow hunting tourism. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think what people need to understand, we talk about this disconnect in modern society. You don't even know where your food comes from. There was a survey done in the Chicago Public School District pre-COVID, a year before or so before COVID, and basically 47% of the high schoolers in the school district didn't realize that their hamburger came from an animal. 47%.
Wow.
Here's the fact. I mean, let's face it. I mean, you ever bought a Happy Meal before? McDonald's Happy Meal? You know anybody there? Yeah.
I mean, it's been many years.
Yeah.
But
So,
yes.
but everybody in the room, that's all raised our hand. We've all
Mhm.
bought a Happy Meal. Okay. Well, let me clue you into something. There's nothing happy about a Happy Meal. You understand that? There's nothing happy about a Happy Meal. I don't care if you got the cheeseburger or the chicken nuggets.
With the toy.
You paid someone to raise and slaughter an animal to feed your kid. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mhm.
Without the death of over 80 billion land animals on this planet and over 1.4 trillion aquatic animals on this planet, humanity ceases to exist. And you can say, okay, well, I'm a vegan. I only eat grains and whatever else. Well, guess what? I can take you down off, out to the Mississippi Delta out there in the Gulf of Mexico, and I can show you 1,000+ square miles of dead ocean because of the over sediments and all the issues that come off of the soil in our breadbasket of America, whether it be fertilization, excess fertilizers to, all these different chemicals and things like that. And again, you can tell me, like I said earlier, that, hey, I don't believe in this, but where's your house sitting in? Your house used to be wildlife habitat. The boards in your house used to be wildlife. The hypocrisy here needs to stop, because if it doesn't stop, we're doing much greater damage. When we talk about the Humane Society of the United States, I got news for you folks. They're not spending any money on wildlife conservation. They're not out doing anti-poaching work. They're not out there protecting forest lands and habitat for wildlife. They're not paying for conservation. They're not paying for the protection with game scouts or with game wardens or conservation officers. They're not paying for the scientists to do the research. Hunters are paying for that. And so we have to realize that it's a system that works. I mean, the North American conservation model came from Theodore Roosevelt. And when he was president of the United States, before that, he had ridden all over, the West looking for a bison because he wanted to hunt a bison. This is after market hunting, which is not recreational hunting we have here in the United States, but market hunting had been used to absolutely that, and fighting the war against the Indians had absolutely destroyed and decimated wildlife stocks throughout the Western United States and throughout all of the continental North America. And so because we overused it, and those parallels exist right in Africa today. That's what I witnessed, the same kinds of parallels. But what Theodore Roosevelt ushered in was this modern conservation ethos. He started the Boone and Crockett Club back in 1898. It is the oldest wildlife conservation organization in the world. There's nothing in China, there's nothing in Europe that's anywhere near like it. And what they did is these gentlemen saw, they started, he started the national park, not the national parks, but he started the national forests with Gifford Pinochet. These guys were really thinking big. It's like, hey, we just watched everything get steamrolled, but we know if we leave it alone, Mother Nature will kind of help get this thing back, but we can help it. And that's why we have wildlife. That's why you have elk in your yard. That's why you have deer around. That's why there's turkeys running around all over the East Coast. It's because hunters went out there and put their money where their mouth was, and they actually created and protected these environments of the wildlife. Look at Ducks Unlimited. We've got some of the greatest populations of waterfowl. Matter of fact, there's in many cases more animals now, much more animals now on the landscape than there was when the Pilgrims showed up at Plymouth Rock, and much more animals than when the conquistadors came. Because when the conquistadors came to this continent, there was hardly any wildlife because there was a lot of humans here, and they were very effective killers. Taken point, Dr. Geist told me about 10,000 years ago. What would extinct 10,000 years ago in North America?
All the mammoths.
Yeah, woolly mammoths.
All the big wildlife.
Our version of an elephant with hair. And the reality was, if you look at the archaeological record, humans at 10,000 years ago figured out how to make poison. And if you look at their arrowheads, at that time, you'll find them with these little grooves in them where they could put that paste of that poison they made. And according to Dr. Geist, they were able to have one, prior to that, it would take an army of guys throwing spears and rocks to try to kill one to eat. But then at the same time, now they could take one guy with an arrow, bow and arrow, and they could shoot that thing, that animal in its belly fat, and it would kill the animal. One man, one arrow could kill that animal now without putting a whole lot of undue stress or danger on the hunter. And that meat would be the poison would metastasize out of it because of the belly fat, and they could have all that stuff. Well, what coincides with that? The total extinction of the woolly mammoth here in North America. So, and the woolly rhinos, same time period. So we have the ability to destroy any and everything. And we have a long record of doing it. So when we talk about the North American conservation model, it is absolutely the best wildlife conservation model that we've ever come up with in modern time, at any time in human history. Southern Africa, they talked about this ranching for wildlife they have going on. They have more wildlife than they have ever had in their recorded time period. And it's because the wildlife has a value and it can live very well and its habitat. That's what it lives in. So there's some people say, hey, we shouldn't be hunting, or hunting's terrible and stuff. And I'm like, well, listen, folks, you're causing all kinds of degradation and destruction of habitat with the decisions you make, the products you buy, things like that, or the groups that you support. Or, at the same time, you're still going to the grocery store. Where's the grocery store get this stuff from? At the end of the day, it comes from a rancher, whether it be a corporate farm or be a family farm. I'm actually working on another film right now about ranching families. And again, they're an indigenous rural community. And they're dealing with all these threats, whether it be, animals, predators, like grizzly bears and wolves that aren't being managed on the landscape, or, other outfits and other people from outside the area trying to impose their will and their way of life on these people that have been on the ground for, in some cases, 120, 130 years. And again, most public wildlife in North America, especially in the Rocky Mountain West, lives on private ground. So if that person, that rancher, doesn't see a benefit from having that elk or that deer or that pronghorn antelope on his land, why should he keep extra grass out there for him? You got to start thinking about these things, because these people are really the stewards of this public resource. So there's some really important things we have to understand. And none of this is simple. It's very complex. It's not, the big thing is we've outsourced our killing. Our modern society is. And I honestly start thinking about, there's two major events that occurred. The first one is the Lacey Act. We enacted this law to stop market hunting. Again, it has nothing to do with the hunting we have today, but market hunting where you out and shot everything and for the pot and sold it to whoever would buy it from you. You didn't eat it yourself, which is the bushmeat industry we have in Africa today. Mirrors it completely. But we also have a situation where we had the Great Depression. Prior to the Great Depression, most people had friends or family members that owned a ranch or a farm. So I grew up going to a farm in Indiana, and my grandpa chopped the head off a turkey, and then off a chicken, and then it ran around the yard. Most people are like, oh my, I can't believe that, but it was just expecting. Nobody worried about it because we knew that guy was going to get boiled and we were having chicken salad for lunch tomorrow. That's where your food comes from. It comes from other animals. And the fact is, Brooke, everything is trying to eat something to survive.
Absolutely.
Obviously, our omnivores and our predators are trying to eat other things. And you walk around your house, if you got spiders, that's a good thing. That means you got something to eating the bugs, and the bugs, if they're
those mosquitoes.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is we have to understand, a lot of people don't realize that we talk about carrying capacity, and people, well, what the heck? It's just some scientific term. No, if you were to take, what I try, right now we've got a problem in Botswana where there's too many elephants. And everybody says, well, elephants
it's a big problem.
No, they're not endangered. Just like, wolves are not endangered. We got more wolves than we know what to do with, not just in the lower 48, but throughout Canada and Alaska. I mean, there's wolves everywhere. There's grizzly bears everywhere. But the problem we have is that people don't really understand that it takes so much vegetation on the land for an elephant to survive. Well, right now, I think there's about 140,000 elephants in Botswana. Botswana is a semi-arid country. It's almost desert. And in some cases, it is desert. And these elephants crowd into areas, especially where there's rivers. And when they get to be too many of them, they literally destroy. And I have seen this myself.
I saw it too.
Miles and miles and miles of wasteland that looks like something out of an apocalyptic movie. There's nothing alive, not even a blade of grass. And that's because
trees are bent over.
They're just dead. They're just skeletons out there. And I'm not talking about a little area here and there. I'm talking about as far as the eye can see. And this is all from there being too many elephant on the land. And what I liken this to is, if you were to take, how many people have been to New York Central Park? It's this great big park in downtown New York. Okay, let's go ahead and put 150, 200 people in there. And you're going to go in there on this Friday, and you don't come out till a year from now, and see what happens. Well, the first thing these people are going to do is they're going to cut down all the wood so they can have fires to stay warm in the winter. Then where are they going to get food? And you can't eat grass, not very well. Can't eat trees very well. So if there's any squirrels or pigeons or any animal comes in, any fishing, tadpoles, whatever, everything is going to be eaten. And at the end, they won't make it a year. They won't make it a month or two. And then they're going to be strife and civil strife and problems. But my point is that the land can only it can't handle a couple hundred people in there. It might handle 10 if they can figure out how to live sustainably. And that's what we have to figure out. The biggest problem on our planet today is us, human beings. And it's the 7.5, I've heard 8 billion humans on this planet. And really what we need to do is make sure that we give a hand to the people that are out there that are going to try to, maybe going to be these last bastion of defense against this human tsunami of our population, because we don't have anybody out there caring about the land, because they're more worried about, like I said earlier, is it a chai latte or caramel macchiato or whatever's on the latest Facebook posting or Instagram or Twitter, and they sit around here and everybody's business now. But the reality is we make these decisions that have really adverse effects. And, to the politicians out there that are listening, hey, think about the downstream effect. If you're telling somebody in Africa that they can't benefit from their hard work in wildlife conservation, how are you different than some British colonial master from the 17th century? How are you different from somebody from the Ku Klux Klan? Because that's why it's what you're telling me, it's what you're telling these people there, that they don't have a right to the most basic human rights that we all take for granted. And that's when you have to start thinking about, because, when you start talking about importing the trophies and banning this and whatnot, or banning the hunting of this, or you want to politicize, vote for me and I'll ban this type of hunting, or I'll ban hunting for the species. How does a wildlife scientist, a conservation scientist and biologist, how do they manage an ecosystem when they can only work with bits and pieces of it? You either work with the entire ecosystem or you don't do the job. I mean, it's like trying to reconcile your checkbook, but you can't look at Tuesdays and Thursdays every month. You just have to work on the other ones and estimate what you think you're doing the rest of the time. And that's what we're doing today with all this litigation. And of course, the people that are bringing on these lawsuits, they get paid money. They got millions. In some cases, I think Humane Society is about $200 billion or $200 million company or nonprofit. I know that a lot of groups like them, I think altogether, they bring in about close to $1 billion for their efforts. And it pays for a lot of suits, pays for a lot of lobbyists, a lot of attorneys, pays for a lot of ad campaigns, $600, $800 one-page ads in People magazine. And what does it do for rural indigenous communities? What does it do for wildlife? What does it do for wildlife habitat? Nothing. Zero. Matter of fact, it does a lot of bad things. It's a negative impact on those things. And so we just have to realize everything we do every day has an impact on the world. You make a decision to buy products, or you take your garbage, or what kind of things you use. I mean, all those things do have a downstream impact. And so we just have to be thinking about, hey, how can we do this right? And maybe we shouldn't be vilifying certain people or certain, parts of our society and saying, hey, you know what, maybe I need to open my eyes out and see what these guys do, because I grew up like you in a hunting family, and, I love to eat pheasant. I don't know anybody who doesn't like to eat pheasant. I love venison jerky. We make it every year. My kids and I always are out there, hunting and harvesting game. We fill up our freezer with huckleberries. I mean, we get as many huckleberries as we can. Here in Montana, they're worth $80 a pound, by the way. Don't tell anybody that.
Don't mind your freezer.
But yeah, I mean, we love to catch walleye and perch. We love to catch a lot of, hunt and fish and collect from what Mother Nature has out there. And I think if more people were to do things like that, where they interact with nature and they care about it and they keep an open mind, again, hunting a lion's not the right thing for everybody, but if we can find 50 individuals or 100 individuals over the course of the year that want to write a $80 or $100, $120,000 check, God bless them. God bless them what they're doing, because you know what? Without that, there wouldn't be any lions. And I got lots of scientists that will tell you that right to your face. If you don't think that you're going to have wild lions by banning the hunting of lions and the importation of the trophies, and you think somehow that's going to make Mother Nature wonderful and everything's going to be wonderful with that. Again, when the old lion gets kicked out of the pride, he doesn't just, obviously the females do most of the hunting. Yeah, he can hunt for a little while, but he's going to get to a point, he might be 9, 10, 12, 13 years old, like Cecil the lion. I don't know about a lion having a name, but nobody in Zimbabwe knew who Cecil was except for the photo safari guys. And and that's another story. How did it get a 13-year-old lion in the wild that had this incredible coat that looked like he just came out of a cat commercial, a shiny, silky coat, and great muscle tone? But that's for another discussion. But yeah, you look at this and you just say, hey, maybe it's not a good thing, but at the end of the day, the benefit outweighs the negative stuff. And we're going to eat game. We're going to eat steaks. We're going to eat chicken. We're going to eat turkeys coming up on Thanksgiving. We're going to have our hams and stuff. And, that's all, it's just natural. It's what we're supposed to do. That's how we survive on this planet. And the key is just making sure we leave it better than we found it.
Right. And what gives me so much hope, and I'm sure that you've started to see it as well, I feel like there's a movement coming, especially as like some of the younger generations are getting more aware and more in positions of possible power or decision making, that I think there's this big reconnect that's happening, and there's more conversations happening about bringing in local voices. And because before it was very much there's conservation and then there's people, and now there's really starting to be like, well, you can't have conservation without people. Wildlife conservation is actually people management, and that is starting to become more to light, which I love. So then all these people are more empowered. We get to share these voices. Also too, more of this like rewilding movement, there's all of this awareness that's starting to happen, that's starting to boil and seep over into like different things. And I think people are just really starting to open their eyes to this type of stuff and this way of life, and people who do want to get more connected with the land. And and everything, and go to these far off places and meet these people and see films like this and be a little bit more open-minded. And that's what makes me really excited, and that's what gives me a lot of hope, because I have conversations with people all the time. Yeah, there's a ton of people that are really loud on social media about damn you if you're not a vegan, and damn you if you do this, and like all this kind of stuff. But that's a few minor subset of people that are screaming and shouting these things.
Yep.
It's most of us that are coming together and being like, what's the actual solution here? What is actually going to move the needle? There are way too many people that are living in far below what's acceptable in any way, shape, or form. The fact there's still child brides, the fact that there's still no women's rights in so many places of the world. It's like, how do we solve this and keep our wildlife? Because we can't just look at the wildlife here. We have to look at the people who live with them. Because if they have everything they need, then the wildlife will thrive, because the people won't be reliant on taking the resources unsustainably. So it's full picture here. I mean, it's the same in the US. It is the same abroad. It is in so many places. And
yeah, you're 100% correct. I mean, the issue is humans, and the reality is what people need to understand. I had mentioned earlier that I judged a bunch of feature-length documentaries for Jackson Wild this year. The kind of the Oscars of the wildlife filmmaking world, and what I realized, why my film and the films I'm making now are so different than what you see coming out of the BBC and Nat Geo, Discovery Channel. They're incredible films, incredible filmmakers telling these incredible stories, but they're all about a specific animal or a specific ecosystem, an area, a valley, or an ocean, a sea, whatever, a mountain range. They're about issues. But what they all forget, and what they don't include in their films, is the 10,000-pound gorilla in the room, us, humans. Like I said earlier, we have an impact over every bit of the earth. Every one of these animals survives or lives on this earth because we deem we want it to. If we don't want it to, it'll be gone. Right. And that's when you say, when we've got these new generations, the local of our movement, wanting to eat sustainably from things that come from your home. Why do we ship grain from Montana to New York? Why can't New York grow its own grain? I mean, I got some friends that are farmers and won't be happy with me, but the reality is, hey, I'd like to keep your grain here. And maybe we don't need as much of our land in grain production. Maybe some of it can be turned back over to wildlife. If we take our national forests, do you know that some of our forests in the United States are 100% managed for either berry or mushroom production? Well, why aren't we managing these grounds to also produce wildlife? Whether it be rabbits and squirrels or deer, turkeys, elk, whatever this is. But that's put that emphasis on that, so that because the more wildlife we have and the more habits we have, our ecosystem is going to be much healthier. We have that biodiversity that we need, and predators have a place in that. So I think, is hunting a great thing? For some people, there needs to be a reset on ethics and some other things within the hunting community. But overall, I think we all understand that for as long as humans have walked on 2 feet, no matter what your political beliefs are, where you're from, your nationality, your religion, or anything, I think we all can agree we've hunted. And there's nothing wrong with that. And whether, you want to outsource your killing to somebody else, that's up to you. I know a lot of people get squeamish because they don't want to deal with blood, but they've learned to be that way. That's not the way we've always been.
Just haven't been exposed to it.
But, again, it's about being able to utilize the resource, caring about the resource. And when we do that, then it's going to be around for a long time. And that's the most important thing, is people have to understand that you may be told something, but keep your mind open. And that's my goals. I want to reach that 70, 80% in the middle who don't really care one way or the other. They're not hunters, or they're not anti-hunters. They're just people that care about our planet, care about our society, care about wildlife and wild places. And I think at the end of the day, those are the people that, if they get educated, so they're not ignorant about some of the things that they see. Social media, there's groups out that are weaponizing, this trophy hunting thing and hunting this and hunting that. And unfortunately, these people are extremely insincere with what they're doing. They may think they're doing it right, but actually they're doing a lot of wrong. And in the hunting side, there are some groups out there that do hunting for the wrong reasons. And that's what gets broadcast. You see these guys out there. And again, because we have this disconnect, and you see some guy holding this big antlered deer or this elk, and he's got a big smile on his face, and when you outsource your killing and you don't like to see blood anyway, you don't understand why would a guy be standing next to this animal that he's killed. I mean, it's a difficult thing to fathom and to accept. But at the end of the day, we're responsible for killing a whole lot of animals on this planet. And it's a good thing, because without it, humanity ceases to exist.
Yeah, and I also love that point of how you're trying to connect with a solid group of people that are very open-minded to this kind of stuff. They're like, I don't know how to solve this. I really don't know, but I'm very open. And while social media is such an amazing tool, and I'm a big advocate for using people's platforms to share their voice, especially good messages, because we need more of it, because there is so much bad. And very recently, Bill, he's my mentor, and now I work for him at the Wild Source. He very recently went on a rant, and I really loved it, because just sometimes it's so easy to not think things through. That there was a prominent person in the conservation world, I guess you can say, advocating hardcore for people to stop traveling to Africa because of all of the carbon emissions it puts out. And he's like, if you really tell people to stop going to Africa, what the hell do you think is going to happen to all of that wildlife for no tourist dollars coming in? So again, bringing to your point, like not thinking this through, just like blasting it out. Yeah. Well, yes, climate change is a huge issue. We do need to reduce that. But, actually talking to your politicians, putting money, literally your money where your mouth is, and because your dollar will dictate what businesses do. Because if you're like, I'm going to go with this option for this option, that business is going to listen to you. It's industry that's some of the biggest drivers of climate change. It's not your wildlife loving person that wants to go to Africa that is helping save and prosper the Soli people that you went and saw in Luano. Like,
well, I mean, case in point, in Luano, BCP, Biocarbon Partners, has about a third of the lower Luano under contract with the people of Shikabeta. They pay out $100 and some $1,000 a year to the local community so that they won't deforest the land for charcoal production or to sell the timber to the Chinese. And so that's wildlife areas that are protected, but it's also being protected because of that carbon sequestering that goes on in that area. So all of these wildlife areas that are natural, it doesn't matter if it's prairie grasses or if it's trees, they all will absorb carbon. And there's ways to deal with the carbon issues. I've got lots of friends that are in the oil and gas industry that are scientists, and they're like, yeah, we have the technology to pull CO2 out of the air. The problem is we're not paying for it. We're not capturing it and sticking it back in the ground where it came from. And we have the technology to do that. We could use all the fossil fuels we want in the world. We're just not doing it right. And again, it's about being open-minded. The same thing happens with wildlife and habitat conservation. If we're open-minded about it, we see positive change. We see people taking care of things. None of us has to have a degree in wildlife conservation or some sort of wildlife biology, but we do know there's people out there that do it. And science has to be king at the end of the day. It can't be emotion.
yes.
Because emotions are not going to get you across the finish line. They're actually going to put you in the opposite direction.
God, I wish that could be like in like neon lights across the screen right
Yeah.
now. I feel the same way. Oh my gosh, I could not agree with more.
So Killing the Shepherd, it's a feature-length documentary. Like I said earlier, it's been accepted in 38 film festivals. It's won 20 major awards, everything from best cinematography, which is been quite a few times, but probably the most important thing and the really thing that really tugs at my heart is the awards we've gotten for indigenous filmmaking, that story, social issues, and human rights. And that's really what this is about, is making sure that these people have a voice. And that's my goal, is to give them that voice so that they can reach the world. And so I'd say that if you can go and watch the film and share it with your friends and talk about it on social media, go to killingtheshepherd.com. You can buy a digital cinema ticket between November 27th and January 15th. And then after that, it'll be available on all these other platforms. I'm sure you'll be able to Google and find it all over the place. But do us all a favor. Help us spread the word about this incredible story about these great people in Shikabeta and the Nortons, and what they're doing for wildlife and habitat conservation, and what they're doing for these local indigenous communities. Because without that buy-in, we're not going to have the wildlife and the wild places that we have today. And I think it's important to me, and I think it's important to everybody out there to have that knowledge, knowing that we've got people that really care about the resource, and they're going to ensure that biodiversity for generations to come. So Shepherds, you can go to shepherdsofwildlife.org to get a lot of information about what we're doing there. Of course, that's behind these films, killingtheshepherd.com if you want to watch the film, but you can actually find it from Shepherds also. So, but we're on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can find me at TA Opre. A lot of people go, why do you go by TA? Because aren't you Tom? And I'm like, well, yeah, my dad's Tom too, and he's still alive. And I told you earlier, he was a very accomplished journalist and was part of a team that won a Pulitzer Prize. And so since he's still around, out of respect to him, and I am writing a book about this film too, and I've written quite a few articles about it. So I go by TA, just even though we both have the same first name and different middle names. So that way I don't want any confusion there, but confusing myself talking about it. But yeah, so we're available, shepherdsofwildlife.org to find out information about me. And you can always find my personal accounts also on Instagram and Twitter. Well, I guess I'm not on Twitter, but Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. I don't know. Every once in a while, I'm on Clubhouse. So
yeah, I haven't been on it so long. I've been on it so long. One of the last times is when I connected with you. It just was meant to happen.
Yeah. So yeah, you can DM me anytime you want. I always will respond to questions, and we just would love to have your support. We have a store on Etsy too. If you want to go Shepherds of Wildlife, check out Etsy. We have a store. We got lots of like this shirt right here. This is got the movie poster out here.
Oh, that's awesome.
Got the movie poster over here. So
I need one of those.
Yep. So folks want to we'll have DVDs and Blu-rays out first part, probably January, February. And then the book I have it's 72,000 words right now. So it's telling the story of this entire, because when you make a film, there's only so many things that you can really include in a film. And
right.
So with writing a book, I'm able to fill in all the holes. I get people asking me lots of questions and I'm like, well, there really was no place to put that in the film. Whereas now with the book, I can really go in depth about why things are the way they are, what occurred. And I literally tell that story of my experience over the course of 3.5 years, spending that time traveling during COVID, the height of COVID, all the things that we did, going on, on anti-poaching missions, getting embedded with the scouts, going in at night, locked and loaded with AK-47s, not knowing what was going to happen. I'm sitting here with a camera with a picture light on it, lighting up the side of the, of the forest, knowing full well if this is an ambush, I'm going to be the first one to get shot. So yeah, it's a really interesting book, and I've tried to write it so it's entertaining at the same time, besides just giving people information. And I think people will really like it. So it'll be out early part of next year. I think probably February, March. And if you don't catch the film over the next couple months online, I know that we're going to be on PBS. We're working with the PBS station, Valley PBS in Fresno, California. And so we're going to have, probably in March, we're going to have a broadcast there that probably will get picked up throughout all of California and maybe the rest of the United States. So we'll see how it goes. And stay tuned on our social media, because I think what we're going to do with that is have a live panel discussion after the showing of the film. But we're also going to have a panel discussion at the end of this film online too. So we've got some people lined up from Africa. They're going to talk about their issues and how they relate to what we've documented, and a lot of the things that you and I talked about today on this podcast. Some folks, Africans talking about Africa with me, along with, I think we're going to have Professor Hart on there from University of Gloucestershire too. So we'll have that science side of things at the same time. So it's been cool. It's been real. It's been awesome sitting here. I had a chance to tell you, and I want to thank you for letting me be on your platform and being able to talk to your audience. And again, you guys can find me online, PM me anytime, or DM me, and I'll definitely get back to anybody that sends me a message.
Awesome, Tom. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to get this out and share your film to the world.
Hey, thanks again for listening to this episode of Rewildology. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button to never miss a future episode. Do you have a cool environmental organization, travel, story, or research that you'd like to share? Let me know at rewildology.com. Until next time, friends, together we will rewild the planet.